Australia's exports to China hit record highs in 2023. Australia's exports to China surged to record highs in March as the Asian giant sucked in more iron for its steel industry and lowered barriers to thermal coal shipments amid thawing diplomatic relations. Data released on Thursday showed exports of Australian goods to China hit $19 billion $12.71 billion in March, a rise of 31% from a year earlier and pipping the previous peak from mid-2021. China is Australia's greatest two-way trading partner in products and services, making up close to one-third of the nation's international trade, as per the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Commerce. Australia, on the other hand, is China's fifth biggest source of imports and 10th largest export market. As of December 2022, the top exports from Australia to China included iron ore, $5.48 billion, petroleum gas, $1.65 billion, other minerals, $1.08 billion, gold, $742 million, and wheat, $214 million. Australia imports 25% of its manufactured products from China. The nature of this merchandise has evolved from the early imports of textiles and clothing to home appliances in the 1990s to engineering items and telecommunications equipment in the present. Australian products have significant competitive advantages in China, particularly natural resources, coal and gas, wool, and food and agricultural products, beef, wine, barley, and seafood, to mention a few. In addition, its abundant stocks of vital minerals, notably lithium and iron ore, make Australia a strategic trading partner for China. Chinese companies notably own shares in important Australian mines. As of December 2022, the top exports from China to Australia included refined petroleum, $496 million, computers, $403 million, telephones, $352 million, cars, $324 million, and other furniture, $157 million. Wine. China officially imposed duties of between 116.2% and 218.4% on Australian wines in containers of up to 2 liters in March 2021 after concluding anti-dumping investigations. It is believed that Australia has asked for the tariffs on wine to be removed in full, or returned to the previous pre-sanction levels, before Australia will drop its WTO investigations. Barley. China's Commerce Ministry said in mid-April that it would review the necessity of continuing to impose anti-dumping and anti-subsidy tariffs on imported Australian barley, with the survey to be completed within a year. Days before, Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong said Australia would suspend its WTO case after China's tariffs of 80.5% on Australian barley all but wiped out imports of the grain by the world's biggest beer market. At the start of June, Farrell said that China's review into the tariffs was heading in the right direction, and that the process was close to completed. Lobsters. Australian lobsters were caught up in the unofficial bans after Canberra called for an international inquiry into the origin of COVID-19 in 2020. In 2019, before the ban was put in place, more than 90% of Australian rock lobsters were exported to China. It was reported in early 2023 that China was discussing customs clearance for Australian lobsters. Coal. In March 2020, before China's unofficial ban on Australian coal, imports of coking coal had reached 4.36 million tons, while 5.65 million tons of thermal coal entered the Chinese market, according to official data. In March, China's coking coal purchase from Australia quadrupled from the previous month, while thermal coal imports rose 14-fold. Cotton. Once the biggest market for Australian cotton, the $900 million Australian dollars, $621 million trade ground to a halt in late 2020 after China imposed a series of official and unofficial restrictions. China imported 20,000 tons of Australian cotton in 2022, compared with 400,000 in 2019, according to Chinese customs data. But it was reported in February this year that Chinese buyers were buying up Australian cotton, and that it was being shipped to a bonded warehouse in Qingdao and possibly one other location. Logs/timber. Chinese Ambassador Xiao Qian said in May, days after Australian Trade Minister Farrell returned from a trip to Beijing, that China would resume imports of Australian timber. The once $600 million Australian dollars, $399 million annual timber trade with China had been largely suspended since late 2020 after Beijing said it had found pests in shipments coming from several Australian ports. But the frosty relationship has shown signs of thawing since last year when the Labour Party swept to power in Australia. Earlier this year, Beijing removed all remaining curbs on Australian coal imports, ending an unofficial ban. China is Australia's largest trading partner, accounting for nearly one-third of its overseas trade, according to the Australian government. For Beijing, commodities from Australia are important for its efforts to revive the pandemic-hit economy. Iron ore, for example, is a vital component of its steel industry. With China embarking on an infrastructure spending spree to help the economy recover from the pandemic, Beijing's need for it has never been greater.